Okay, so we're gonna make a perfect gluten-free pie crust. It's so easy. It kind of makes it seem insane that you would worry about a tough crust or another kind of crust. It's used with all-purpose gluten-free flour and a little bit of maple sugar, salt, ice cold water, and then I have cold coconut oil, unrefined, and some vegan butter. And the recipe will be posted after the video is up, but we're just gonna make this, and don't think of it being a traditional pie crust. I know, like, for some of you who are traditional bakers, you'll be like, oh my God, she's manhandling the dough. But don't worry about it, because there's no gluten in anything, so there's no way that you can overactivate it. So, we're going to put all the ingredients. We've got all-purpose gluten-free flour, which is a blend, and I'll give you the kind that I use. And we're gonna put it through a mesh strainer just to catch any clumps of anything, salt, any clumps of sugar, so that it's evenly distributed, sifted. And then we'll put, this is maple sugar. You can use sucanat, you can use another kind of dried sugar, coconut sugar. I haven't tried it with a wet sugar, but the maple sugar gives a really nice kind of sweetness, and the salt balances that out. So we'll put that in, and we're just gonna sift it through. So you can see, like, even that, you can see, like, these are the clumps that we're gonna just try to break up. So you just give it a nice shake, work out the clumps, and I just pass it through. It's not necessary, but I kind of feel like maybe it's a little necessary, so that you have a nice tasting balanced crust. And so I just shook everything everywhere. And then we're gonna add in the fat, and we'll just put this in. I'm gonna actually cut this in with 2 knives. You can cut it in with a pastry cutter, but I'm just gonna put this in its entirety. And it should be cold. Again, once the oils get too hot, it'll kind of make the dough damp, and you want the fat to be encased with the flour. So you don't want it liquid. So that's why it doesn't have to be cold, like cold butter for a traditional pie crust, but you want it to be cold so that it doesn't melt and create like I don't even know what to call it. So we're just gonna cut this in and cut it down so that there's not giant chunks of coconut or the butter. And if you wanted to use just butter for a more buttery traditional pie taste, you could do that. If you don't like coconut oil is one of the most stable oils and one of the best cooking oils, one of the most healthiest oils. So again, you're just trying to get it so it almost looks like a crumb, right? And so I'm gonna see in here that if it's too big, I'm just gonna cut those down. And again, the pastry cutter is like a really good, it looks like it's like a handle of dull blades that you would just kind of do quick work out of this. But again, keeping it simple and using what you have in the kitchen. So you see how it's almost like they're little encased. You can't get, it's not damp at all. And then we're gonna start to add the cold water in. Again, the cold water only because we want to keep the temperature of the oils cooler, on the cooler side, so that it doesn't melt and create clumps. So from here, I'm gonna add a tablespoon at a time. You're up to 6 tablespoons. Again, you're gonna want to work it with your hands, clean hands. And I'm just gonna add the first couple of tablespoons and just distribute it around. And then toss that around so I catch the flour. So I put 2 tablespoons in. It's still really dry. If I pinch it together, it's still very crumbly. So I'm gonna add another 2 and see where that takes us. And so I'm like a loose claw, kind of integrating the moisture into the flour mix. And so again, it's gonna start to get more of like a crumb, and I'm gonna see if I can work it into a pinch. It's still a little dry. So I'm gonna add another tablespoon. And now I'm gonna start to give it a squeeze. And this is where traditional pie crust makers would be like, oh my God, don't overwork it. But so you can really, really kind of go. And so now I'm gonna try to bring this to a ball. And so the problem with a traditional pie crust is that the more you work it, the tougher the dough gets. So it's like you want to be as gentle as possible. But so with this, again, we don't have the situation of gluten, which is going to get activated. So I'm just going to sprinkle in. I'm not going to use the full tablespoon. I'm just going to sprinkle in to sort of collect all of these leftover, you know, stragglers that aren't coming into the ball. And then it's gonna start to form its own dough ball and collect all of these little guys, just like that. So now, traditionally what you would do is you would let this rest, but we don't have to. So, and I also, the recipe that's up on the Vegan Love Project, I had it so that you shaped it out to a disc and then you let it rest again so that you're not working the oils or heating up the dough. But I made this last week and I just went from here right to the pie pan, and I didn't roll anything out, didn't have to do any of that. I just actually worked it right into the pie crust pan. So I believe this to be an 8-inch pan, but don't quote me, I will get you the notes for sure. And I'm just gonna take the dough and work it directly down and in. So this is kind of gonna be where you're gonna want to finesse the dough a little bit, because you're going to want to really feel with your hands the depth and make sure it's evenly going through. So I'm going to use the pad of my thumb to work this from the center out. So I'm going to work it so it's going to actually start to push it out this full circumference of the pan. And I can feel it in my palm and also the pad of my pinky. I can feel it when it's too thick, so I'm just gonna work that through, and I'm just gonna continue to work this out and up the sides. So this is probably the most, I don't know, intensive part, right? And where you'll start to get, the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get. And so I'm just gonna continue to keep going around and around. And again, coming back to the center, and working so that the center of the crust is not too thick. And really the where you want to focus is this corner where the sides of the pan meet the center of the pan, because that's, you don't want a big fat bite of crust there instead of the pie filling. So I'm just going to keep working my hands around and around and around. And you see, as it starts to come up, I'm going to start to play with shaping out how it hits the top. So again, I come back to center. So when I feel like I'm running out of dough to climb, I'm gonna come back from the center and push it back out. So you see, like, you watch when I push here, it almost forces it up, right? So I'm gonna just keep doing that. And again, because we're not working with strands of gluten, we can take pieces from a thicker part and place it somewhere else. So now I'm going to use my fingers, the pads, to kind of work up the sides and again into that seam. And breathe. And send love into your pie. And again, I'm going to just keep shaping. And this will be something that you'll start to master, but you can start to see that we have like the dough, little bits of fat, sweet, salt. And this, I love this pie crust. I love that it came out so well. I love that it continues to get more simple, not more challenging. And I haven't tried it yet, but I'm gonna work on doing like a savory pie crust for like tofu pot pies and stuff like that. Cause the crust is it's so tender and flaky. It's such a good tasting crust, simple, that I think if you omitted the sugar out of it, it would be perfect for like pot pies or quiches. You could pre-bake it and make a quiche. But so I'm gonna continue to work it up, and you'll see that I'm gonna get my little lip, which is then really fun to play with. I used to watch my mom making the lip, and I would marvel at how she would use it. I'll show you in a second. But so again, I'm gonna just clean up these edges so it doesn't look cracked. And that's up to you how refined you go with it, but I appreciate a beautiful pie crust. And so it's such a simple recipe. I do usually make 2 portions, and then that way it gives me some leeway. And you just can weigh out the dough so that you have a balanced pie. So again, come back to center, and I feel around in here all throughout the pie if there's any thicker spaces, and I'm just working them out. And again, it's gonna force the edges up. At the same time, I'm shaping with my left hand to go up and around. And then I just work, and again, feel it through. You can take the back of your knuckle, work into that seam line. Hands are brilliant tools. Be thankful you got them. And then I'm gonna shape my crust. So I'm gonna take my first 2 fingers on my left hand with my knuckle of my right and just create a pinch. And I'm just gonna keep moving the pinch all the way through. And so you wanna be mindful that if there's not a lot of dough, that you don't pinch it because you don't want it to crack. And you could do this with a fork, you know, some like that fluted kind of look, but this is what I used to watch my mom do and how I loved it. And so that's your pie crust. And then I'm gonna take it, because I'm gonna bake the filling right in it, I don't want it to lift up. I don't know if gluten-free pie crust would lift up, but I'm just preventing that if it should happen. So I'm just gonna take the fork and kind of poke holes all the way through the bottom. And this also gives me feedback to feel where there are thicker parts of the crust if I needed to fix it. And I just go right up through the sides. Watch your edge. And that's your perfect unbaked gluten-free pie crust.